Well, thank you, Matt. That was wonderful, and I appreciate all of you coming. And Paula, my wife, is in the background, so back of the room there. So thank you so much. I thought a little bit about how to focus what we should be thinking about today in terms of this presidential address. And so the title of my talk is Research Training as an Integral Part of Surgical Resident Education. And I have no disclosures, except that I really do believe that research training should and must be an integral part of surgical resident education. And my disclosure is that I have received tremendous professional and personal satisfaction from working with our surgery residents throughout the many years that I have worked with them in research, as well as obviously in the clinic and in the OR. But focusing on the research has really been tremendous. And as I have progressed through my career, I've gotten to the point that I receive tremendous amount of benefit from working with the residents. They are truly an exceptional group of people and have contributed tremendously to my own research career. I also want to acknowledge some of the past presidents of the Central Surgical who I have worked with in a variety of different venues, working with them both in the Central, in the American Surgical. I've worked with them on the American Board of Surgery, and they really have been friends. They provided guidance, and they have also been supportive of my career, which is, I've been honored that they have taken it upon themselves to promote me in this organization and others to give me an opportunity for leadership in our beloved surgical societies. I also want to acknowledge the most recent past presidents, Dr. Yen, Dr. Brunt, Dr. Pritz, and President-elect Dr. Walsh, who I've enjoyed working with all of them over the last several years as I have served as a recorder and then as a president-elect. And I appreciate their guidance and support, and they've really been tremendously helpful to me in working in the Central. And I want to thank my wife, Paula, who's here today and has come to many of these meetings, pictured here both at the American Surgical and at the Society of Surgical Oncology, and has been a constant force and has tolerated my focus on research. I sort of am ribbed by some of my friends that when we went on, you heard that we had this romance and got married very quickly. We were on our honeymoon, and I did what I would normally do if I didn't have to go to the OR. I worked on a grant, but she tolerated me for that. I also want to acknowledge a couple of individuals who've had a particularly important role in mentorship of me during my research career. The first is Ed Merrill, who was a professor of chemical engineering at MIT. I did my master's research with him and working on blood-compatible surfaces, and he was a professor in polymer science in chemical engineering at MIT. And he's actually had influence on a number of surgeons who have done graduate work with him. I also want to acknowledge George Miller, who's a professor of pediatrics and infectious disease at Yale. I did my PhD with George studying Epstein-Barr virus and mechanisms of gene regulation. And he had probably the greatest influence on my scientific career, always teaching that you should base your next set of experiments on what you learned and avoid jumping from topic to topic that's hot in the literature, and really focus and move forward based on your own work. And I want to acknowledge Joe Nevins. He was at Duke when I was a resident there, and I spent time as a postdoc in his lab during my surgery residency. And he has been a tremendous help to me reviewing grants early on in my career, and really a brilliant investigator. And I'd like to also acknowledge Dr. David Sabiston, who was professor and chair of the Department of Surgery at Duke when I was a resident there. Residents pictured behind him there. Really had a long legacy, as you all know, of training surgeons, and also was very supportive of the need for research training during surgical residency, and encouraged all of us to continue working in both clinical and basic research during our careers. And so I want to acknowledge Dr. Sabiston for that. So research training and surgical residency. So why? Why is that important? Well, first, in my view, there needs to be an appreciation for the role of scientific inquiry in its influence of developing new ways of providing clinical care to patients. And I think it's important that department leadership provides equal weight to both the clinical and academic productivity of our faculty. It's also important for our residency director to recognize the need to support research training in our surgical residency. And I think this is a critical aspect moving forward and needs greater attention through the ACGME in training surgical residents. In addition, we train individuals who go into full-time practice. Some of them are in community practices, but they still need to understand the literature and then how to integrate those new findings into their clinical practice. And in order for them to do that effectively, my view is that they need to spend time themselves doing research. And if they do that, they develop an appreciation that allows them to then understand how to incorporate new findings into their practice. And some of the discussions we had today centered around the slow adoption that we have of new information into clinical practice. Part of that, I think, can be enhanced if individuals understand how to read the literature, understand statistical analysis, and can integrate that into their current practice. And I think spending time doing research allows them to do that. And then finally, I'm going to spend a little time talking about surgeon scientists and the value that they bring to advancing clinical care in the surgical setting. It's also important for these individuals to be able to maintain their academic stature with the other within the healthcare system relative to other departments such as internal medicine. And it's important to have surgeon scientists who can also provide a leadership role within our academic and other healthcare structures. Here's a segment that came out of the Flexner report from over 100 years ago, where Abraham Flexner wrote, "The one person for whom there is no place in the medical school, the university, or the college is precisely he who has hitherto generally usurped the medical field, the scientifically dead practitioner whose knowledge has long since come to a standstill." And I think this still rings true today, that it's critically important that we advance knowledge and that we incorporate that knowledge into our clinical practice, and that we are all challenged to continue to do that so that the care that we're providing to our patients 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now is better than what we're doing today. And I believe that surgeon scientists have a critical role in future discoveries that influence surgical care. Here is an editorial that was published in Nature several years ago that talked about dangerous cuts to surgical research, with the numbers of surgeons involved in research which are falling. And this editorial believed that we needed to reverse this trend, which I'll show you some data, still has not happened. And one of the quotes from this is that policymakers must stop seeing surgeons as easy sources of revenue. In the U.S., federal R&D spending as a percent of GDP is woefully low. Our investment in research and development has decreased since the 1970s, and federal research spending is less than 0.5% of our GDP. And anybody who knows business knows that if you're going to advance your business, you have to spend a whole lot more than that in your research and development if you're going to continue to advance. And this research funding that does occur goes back to grow our GDP in the future, and we're just not spending enough and investing in our future. And this is also noted by 2 decades of stagnant NIH funding that has occurred. Although in the top graph are total dollars that may be increasing, if you correct that for inflation, you can see that the NIH funding has actually decreased over the last 20 years. And what that has resulted in is a decrease in success rate for funding. For most institutes, it's around 20%. For some, like NCI, it's less than 10%. And it has been in single digits for over a decade now, which really puts a hamper on the ability to continue to fund and support clinical research and basic science research in clinical departments. The other distressing trend has been a challenge for younger investigators. What's shown here is a decrease in funding for those aged 35 and younger compared to those 66 and older. And I believe this is going to continue to have serious impact for the pipeline of developing researchers in the future, in particular surgeon scientists. So this shows an example of total funding, not correcting for inflation, has increased modestly in total dollars over the time period of this study. Funding to other departments like internal medicine has been flat, or at least has a trend of increasing. But compared to that in surgery, we've actually seen a statistical decrease in funding to surgical departments from the National Institute of Health. And this was highlighted by an article published in the Annals of Surgery that talked about the future of basic science in academic surgery. And showing what they did here is they showed that and reported that there has been a decrease in the relative funding to surgical departments, both in total NIH, both compared to total funding and those compared to, for example, internal medicine. And what has resulted in this is data from the Academic Surgical Congress showing that there has been a decrease in basic science submitted to the Academic Surgical Congress, as well as a proportion of basic science abstracts that are presented. A more recent study that was just published last month looked at rates of National Institute funding for surgeon scientists from 1995 to 2020. And they noted that the proportion of NIH-funded scientists is small, which was only 1.5%, and has decreased to 1.4% over the time period of the study. In addition, the funding gap between surgeon scientists and PhD scientists increased threefold over the time period of this study. Although the global burden of surgical diseases is 30% globally, less than 2% of NIH principal investigators are surgeons. And in addition, although there has been some increased funding to women who are surgeon scientists, it still remains woefully low at less than 20% funding to women surgeon scientists. This article also noted what was published a year or two before as an editorial that suggested the creation of a National Institute of Surgery to make sure that NIH is funding surgical diseases and surgical science. And this summary summarizes, this was published in the Annals of Surgery, summarizes much of what is required to be successful in developing surgeon scientists. They need to have a supportive environment, being in a department that has a track record of funding, that has the available resources, facilities, and the equipment, can guarantee protected time to those individuals, give them appropriate lab space so that they can do their work, and have a group of collaborators that can help develop them. And that group of collaborators also results in having committed mentors who are experienced investigators who can review grants and meet with those individuals. We certainly do that in our department. When we recruit surgeon scientists, we have mentorship committees and try to provide the necessary mentorship for those individuals to be successful. They have to be able to have financial support with competitive salaries that actually value what those individuals do from a scientific perspective, rather than just supporting their clinical activity. And you need to have an environment where RVUs do not trump R01s. And you also need social support with family, friends, and colleagues who can support those individuals through those difficult times. So how do we support research training? Well, society grants are one. You heard some awards given out in the previous hour, which are designed to support our junior faculty. There can be gift funds that are available, and the NIH is still an important part of that funding. And we had a T32 in surgical oncology for the previous 10 years at the University of Iowa, which was used to train a number of individuals that I'm going to highlight here. Here's an example of some of our recent early graduates when the program was first initiated. Many of them have gone on, all of them in fact have gone on to be in academic programs, and several of them we have been able to recruit back to our own faculty. Here's a group of recent graduates who are now beginning to take jobs, who are shown here. And our last year chief residents who are completing their fellowships and also taking academic positions are noted here, again, trained in outstanding fellowship programs. Our group of rising chiefs and senior residents who spent time, at least 2 years in the laboratory. Another group of residents who have just completed their training this past year, and our current group of Iowa residents who are in the laboratory who have been supported through the T32 as well as other mechanisms, and a few of which who have been here at the meeting, and you heard some of the work being presented for them. And it's critically important to build this kind of team that is able to advance research of our faculty and serves as an important area for training individuals. This is a picture from a couple of years ago of our group of trainees, many of them residents, also graduate students and medical students, and undergrads who we've had in the laboratory. And I think it's important to develop this kind of structure so that they feel supported and understand the value of research. So our pipeline for developing surgeon scientists, we trained 29 residents who completed a 2-year research fellowship during their residency. Nearly 40% of these individuals were women. 10% were self-identified as Hispanic or Latino, 17% Asian, and 7% Black or African American. So we are making progress, and it's these kinds of grant research programs which I think will turn the tide on having more women, underrepresented minorities, as well as other groups of individuals who can become surgeon scientists in the future. So when I knew I was becoming president of the Central, I wondered what I could do to make a meaningful and lasting difference on advancing research amongst our residents in the Central Surgical. And so we created the Carol Scott Connor Resident Research Award. And I want to tell you a little bit about this award. So this is to honor Dr. Scott Connor. And for a brief bio, she's also an MIT graduate. She did her MD at NYU. She stayed there for her residency, got her PhD in anatomy from the University of Kentucky, and an MBA from the Else School of Management. She was chair of the Department of Surgery at the University of Iowa and preceded me in that role. And she served as treasurer of the Central Surgical from 2002 to 2005. This is a picture of Dr. Scott Connor from a few weeks ago. We had a dinner at our home for her visiting professorship that we created. She is chair emeritus at the Department of Surgery at the University of Iowa. She is dedicated to the academic mission. She's a kind and thoughtful leader in surgery and really a wonderful human being. She's pictured here with two of our Green Sheet Conyers who are good judges of character, and they obviously love her when she comes and visits. So we created the Carol Scott Connor Resident Research Fund within the Central Surgical. It was established as a fund to honor this past treasurer, and she was the second woman head of a Department of Surgery in the United States. The purpose of the fund is twofold: to award an annual prize for the best presentation by a resident at the Central Surgical Annual Meeting, and to help the Central achieve its objective of furthering the practice of surgery in its various departments and the study and investigation of surgical problems. To have this award, I asked Dr. Jim Howe and Dr. Sonia Sugg to co-chair a fundraising campaign, and they solicited funds from current and former members of the Department of Surgery at the University of Iowa. Our initial goal was to raise $10,000, which we thought would then provide a cash prize in perpetuity of $500 to the best resident research presentation at the Central Surgical Annual Meeting. And this goal was raised to $20,000 because we reached the $10,000 goal quite quickly. As of this morning, I'm told that we have raised $18,700, which has been contributed to the Central Surgical. This is a founding gift from the members of the Department of Surgery at the University of Iowa. We have developed this to award a $500 cash prize given to the surgical resident with the best paper presented at the annual meeting, and my expectation is that this will start in the 2024 CSA annual meeting, and people will be able, when they submit their abstract, to check a box that they are a resident and they will be presenting and they want to be considered for this award. I also expect that the Carol Scott Connor fundraising to continue, potentially expanding the role of this funding. Obviously, at $20,000, a cash prize for the best paper seems reasonable. If in the future years this grows, then obviously that could be developed as a mechanism to actually provide support like the Turcotte Award for resident research. Carol could not be here today, but she did submit a video, and it's a 2-minute video that will be here at the end of my presentation.
An investment in resident research is an investment in the future of surgery, as well as the future of the Central Surgical Association. We might not predict the next great surgeon scientist or the discoveries that might flow from their work, but we can all imagine how participation in the Central might spark new ideas in young minds. Observations in the operating room have led to fundamental and transformative discoveries. Tumor angiogenic factor was first identified and characterized by a surgeon, Dr. Judah Folkman. Another surgeon, Dr. Bernard Fisher, taught us that regional lymph nodes do not function as a barrier to systemic metastatic spread. Rigorous clinical trials under the surgeon-led aegis of the NSABP demonstrated the utility of sentinel lymph node biopsy and breast-conserving therapy. Clearly, not all residents who spend time doing research are destined to become surgeon scientists, but all can benefit from learning how to critically evaluate and approach a problem. This is a process that all surgeons apply in their daily practice. This year's meeting is replete with clinical research, outcomes research, and bench and translational research, much of it presented by new members. Were residents involved in some of these projects? It's likely that they were. Let's create a mechanism that rewards their participation and introduces them to our association. That's what this project is all about. Circumstances preclude my physical attendance, but that does not diminish the strength of my support. While I am honored that this project carries my name, it is not about me. It is about the next generation of surgeons. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to serve this year as your president, and I will be turning the association over to the able hands of Matt Walsh. So thank you so much.